So, this is the weekly Wild Outdoor Living show. This is the first one that I'm doing. Hopefully it's going to go great. Just this week, I'm going to talk about what would it be like if we could go mountain biking on Mars. So, I know this has been touched on by a few other people. I'm going to leave links in the description to a few other articles and YouTube videos that have kind of talked about this. So, what would it be like? What bikes would you take? You know, how long could you go? These are all questions that kind of surface in my mind, so I thought I'd do a little show about them. So I think essentially the bike that you would take would be dependent on the amount of bikes that you could take. So if you could take unlimited bikes, of course you'd bring a fat bike and a plus bike and maybe a cross country bike and a downhill bike just to try them all out. But if usually you're not going to be able to do that. So we're going to have to take maybe one or two bikes, and just because of resources and all that. And we're not going to go into cosmic radiation and the whole trip and how would you live on Mars. We're just going to assume that you have a base and that base can sustain life for an extended period of time, and that it can house the equipment, and that if something does go wrong, there's a possibility of being rescued. So that gives us a little bit more freedom in what we can go and do out there. We're also going to assume that spacesuits are a little bit better than they are now, and they're not quite as bulky, so that riding a bike is actually possible, and maybe even getting a little rowdy on it is possible. So obviously you're going to need some sort of added atmosphere. You're going to need a spacesuit, and you're going to need protection from the elements. And you're probably only going to be able to ride during certain seasons when it's not ridiculously cold or ridiculously hot like it does get on Mars. Sometimes down to negative hundreds and also super hot in other times of the year. So you're going to be limited there. So Mars has a gravity like 38% of the Earth. So that means that the weight you're putting down is significantly less than it is here on Earth. So traction is going to be an issue. Mars's surface is not quite as moon dusty as it were as the moon. It's not quite as soft. There are quite a few sand dunes. They can be quite deep, but from a lot of the pictures we've seen, that is not entirely out of the question. There's a fairly solid surface on the surface of Mars. So you could bring something like a plus bike, and reduce the air pressure significantly in order to gain traction. It seems like a fat bike would be the ideal, but you would be a little bit slower. The bike's gonna be a little bit harder to move around, just like it is here on Earth. I think maybe an initial mission to see how mountain biking would be, you would take a fat bike and just see how bikes ride on Mars, and then you could maybe move into a more agile plus bike. Obviously, 38% of the gravity, you're gonna be able to climb a lot faster, but cornering is gonna suffer. You're going to accelerate a little bit slower, but once you get up to speed, or if you get off the ground, you're going to stay off the ground longer. So, suspension is going to be key. You could definitely go without suspension, and you could certainly ride around like that. But it'd be pretty easy to put a coil fork on a mountain bike at the very least, maybe a coil shock in the rear, and then you'd be able to go out and get a little bit rowdier. I say coil suspension because air pressure is going to be an issue. You can certainly have air tires. They're going to be limited as well. There's some other tires that don't need air at all, and they would be a little bit more ideal. But if you're only going out for maybe an hour at a time, maybe half an hour at a time, you could get away with using air-filled tires and a little bit better tire technology that we already have. But the air-filled forks, if anything were to happen to that air that's in the forks, you would all of a sudden have no suspension whatsoever. So I would suggest a coil spring fork and shock. I would likely go with just a hardtail to keep things simple as possible, but also kind of having suspension again. So things like that would be what you think about. I think ideally you'd have a fat bike and maybe a 27.5 plus. You could have a 29er plus as well, but more likely you're going to go with 27.5 plus just because it's more common. I think the big draw to go and mountain bike on Mars. The fact that there's nobody there, there's absolutely no vegetation, and just it looks like it's going to be some great dirt. So there's a lot of possibilities for big free ride moves, big exploration trips. The big issue that you run into is that you really need to be careful, even having a solid base that you can go back to and support vehicles and all that kind of stuff. You still really don't want to crash, simply because if you tear a suit or if you get injured, you're really far from home. So I would want to get rowdy. I would want to get out there and build some single track trails and really see what you could do in that low gravity environment. I think that's the biggest draw to go mountain bike on another planet, simply because, I mean, where else are you going to be able to ride in an environment that the gravity is different? There's no place on Earth to do that. And so mountain biking on the moon or on Mars is a big draw. I think people have talked about mountain biking on the moon a lot. I think the soil is just so soft that a fat bike is definitely going to be required. And Mars is just, it's got that beautiful red dirt that we seek after here in Arizona and places like Sedona and Mongolia Desert, and a lot of these free ride videos that you see, this beautiful red dirt, it's the same deal. That it's just aesthetically pleasing, but I think both would be awesome. The thing I didn't talk about, I think that it just needs to be mentioned. I mean, you definitely can't have hydraulic brakes because of the pressure differences there. I mean, it could, I shouldn't say definitely, it could happen. You could certainly you could re-engineer the brakes, but it would be a large undertaking. And so it's certainly possible, if you're going to go that far as to go all the way to Mars to ride a bike, then, I mean, maybe reinvent the hydraulic brakes. Or you can just simply use a cable actuated disc brake and be good. You'd certainly want disc brakes, simply because they're more available, and if you do bend a rim, you're going to be able to get back to base, which is super critical. Everything needs to be as redundant as possible. Frame material is really going to be, you're going to really be looking at aluminum, titanium. Mars rover Curiosity, the wheels are made out of aluminum, titanium. I think that's probably, it's got to be the best way to go, simply because that's a more integral material. It's going to be less affected by heat and pressure differences. With carbon fiber frames, they're great here on Earth, but they're engineered for this atmosphere and this gravity and this weather, so that the temperature differences, and they're glued together. So there's an issue of carbon fiber possibly coming apart, but of course it's been used on spaceships and other things, so it could certainly be used as well. So yeah, definitely leave your comments. Tell me what you guys think. I know this is probably never going to happen, obviously, but it's something to talk about. I think it's something to dream about, and that's part of why we ride bikes. So that's it. Thanks. Catch you later.